Before the first steam engine hissed across the Irish Midlands, the skies over the Atlantic coast belonged to a single, undisputed sovereign. To the ancient Gaels, the white-tailed eagle was more than a predator. It was a fixture of the legal and spiritual landscape. Under the Brehon laws, the sophisticated native legal system of early medieval Ireland, the eagle was regarded with a reverence that bordered on the sacred. To kill one without cause was a violation of the natural order. This was the Iolar Mara, the sea eagle, a bird whose presence was so woven into the cultural fabric that it survived in the names of mountains and islands long after the physical creature had been erased from the air. But as the 19th century dawned, the relationship between the Irish people and their largest raptor underwent a violent, systemic fracture. The expansion of intensive sheep farming across the rugged West transformed the eagle from a symbol of nobility into a target for extermination. It was classified, alongside the wolf and the hooded crow, as vermin. This wasn't merely a local grievance. It was a state-sanctioned war on the wild. Bounties were issued, and the eagle's slow reproductive cycle, typically producing only 1 or 2 fledglings a year, made it uniquely vulnerable to a campaign of total attrition. The weapon of choice was not the rifle, but the chemist's cabinet. The introduction of strychnine changed the geometry of death in the Irish countryside. A single sheep carcass, laced with this bitter crystalline alkaloid, could wipe out an entire generational lineage of scavengers in a matter of days. Strychnine is a cruel, persistent killer. It causes violent muscular contractions and eventual respiratory failure. Because the toxin remains active in the tissues of the deceased, the eagle that fed on a poisoned fox became a secondary victim in a cascading cycle of toxicity. By the late 1800s, the once ubiquitous sight of the flying barn door had become a haunting rarity, a ghost story whispered by elderly fishermen along the Kerry cliffs. The final chapter of this original Irish dynasty was written in 1912 on the dizzying heights of the cliffs of Croghan in County Mayo. There, the last breeding pair of native white-tailed eagles attempted to raise a brood against the landscape that had become hostile to their very existence. When they finally vanished, they took with them a biological lineage that had persisted since the retreat of the last glaciers. For the next 95 years, the Irish sky was functionally empty. The great cormorants and grey herons multiplied without the shadow of a master predator to check their numbers, and the vital nutrient link between the deep Atlantic and the inland oak forests was severed. This ecological silence was not just a lack of wings. It was a profound shift in the behavior of every creature beneath the eagle's former throne. Ireland had successfully tamed its wilderness, but in doing so, it had silenced a frequency of nature that had hummed for millennia. The 2,000-kilometer journey from the jagged fjords of Norway to the emerald valleys of Kerry was more than a logistics mission. It was a biological gamble of unprecedented scale. By the late 20th century, Norway had become the primary stronghold for the white-tailed eagle in Western Europe, a reservoir of genetic resilience. To rebuild the Irish population, conservationists partnered with the Norwegian Institute for Nature Research (NINA) to execute a plan dubbed Operation Haliaeetus. This wasn't a random collection of birds. Scientists sought high genetic variability to avoid the founder effect, a common pitfall in reintroductions, where a small gene pool leads to debilitating mutations over time. The selection process was grueling. Field teams in Norway scaled vertical sea cliffs and navigated dense forests to reach nests. Adhering to a strict ethical mandate, the rule of one, they would only harvest a chick if the nest held at least 2 siblings, ensuring the Norwegian donor population remained unaffected. These chicks, typically 7 to 10 weeks old, were at a critical neurological crossroads. This is known as the sensitive period for imprinting, a biological window where the bird's brain is primed to identify its surroundings as its lifelong home. If the birds were moved too early, they would fail to develop the necessary physical strength. Too late, and they would be too set in their Norwegian ways to adapt to the Irish climate. Transported via specialized crates on what locals called the Eagle Express, they landed at Kerry Airport to a reception of both hope and intense scientific scrutiny. From the tarmac, they were whisked away to custom-built aviaries in Killarney National Park, where the hacking process began. Hacking is a sophisticated falconry technique adapted for modern conservation. The chicks were housed in massive wooden structures designed to mimic a natural nest's height and exposure. Crucially, the aviaries were built with one-way feeding hatches. This ensured that while the birds were nourished with local fish and wild venison, they never saw a human face. To an eagle chick, the food simply appeared by magic. This total lack of human association was vital. A tame eagle is a dead eagle in the wild. During these weeks of confinement, the birds weren't just eating. They were imprinting on the geography of Killarney. They spent hours staring out at the oak-lined shores of Laughlin, mentally mapping the landscape. This period of acclimatization was paired with the fitting of state-of-the-art GPS-GSM satellite tags. These solar-powered units, no larger than a matchbox, were fitted with Teflon harnesses designed to fall off after several years. They were programmed to transmit the birds' coordinates every few hours, providing a high-resolution map of their dispersal. When the cage doors were finally pulled back, these pioneers didn't just fly. They launched into an environment they had already spent weeks studying from behind bars. They were Norwegian by birth, but they were being systematically reprogrammed to become the architects of a new Irish wilderness. The return of the white-tailed eagle was not met with universal applause. For the sheep farmers of the rugged uplands and the Atlantic seaboard, the sight of a bird with a massive 8-foot wingspan was not a conservation triumph, but a looming existential threat. This deep-seated friction birthed a clandestine shadow war, one fought with the same chemical weapons that had cleared the skies a century prior. Despite the program's rigorous scientific foundation, the first decade of the reintroduction was haunted by a grim and persistent statistic. Nearly 20 of the initial 100 released birds were confirmed or suspected victims of illegal poisoning. The satellite data told a chilling, consistent story. A transmitter would show a bird moving vigorously through a valley, followed by a sudden, total lack of movement, and then an eerie silence. When researchers tracked these final pings, they often found a bird slumped in the heather, its talons clenched in a telltale post-mortem spasm. Forensic necropsies conducted at the State Veterinary Laboratory revealed a recurring culprit, alpha-chlorulose and carbofuran. These are not casual chemicals. They are highly toxic substances, often applied to baited pieces of meat left out in the open. While the intended targets were often foxes or crows, the eagle's biological role as a master scavenger made it an accidental but frequent casualty. This was the toxic borderline, the precise point where modern conservation goals collided with the survival instincts of a traditional agricultural community. To many hill farmers, the eagle was a landlord's bird, a luxury imposed by Dublin bureaucrats on people whose livelihoods were already on a knife edge. They feared for their lambs, despite overwhelming evidence that healthy, living lambs formed no significant part of the eagle's natural diet. Bridging this cultural divide required a diplomatic peace treaty that was as much about sociology as it was about biology. The National Parks and Wildlife Service (NPWS) launched an intensive community engagement program, moving away from top-down mandates toward collaborative land management. They introduced a landmark compensation and support scheme for farmers in eagle territories, acknowledging the psychological and perceived economic burden of hosting an apex predator. Experts worked directly with local communities, sharing data from Scotland and Norway that proved eagles were actually beneficial cleaning up carcasses that would otherwise spread disease among livestock. The strategy also shifted significantly during the second phase of releases from 2020 to 2025, recognizing that a single concentrated population was uniquely vulnerable to both local hostility and environmental shocks, like the 2018 avian influenza outbreak or the nest-toppling winds of storm. Hannah, the program began seeding birds across a much wider geographic net. By releasing 145 additional eagles along the River Shannon and the Waterford coast, the NPWS effectively decentralized the risk. They created a resilience through distribution model, ensuring that even if one specific valley remained hostile, the species as a whole could continue its inevitable march toward a permanent, self-sustaining presence on the Irish map. When an apex predator is absent for over a century, the ecosystem doesn't just pause, it mutates. In the absence of the white-tailed eagle, the Irish coast became a landscape of unchecked populations and stagnant nutrient cycles. The return of these birds has introduced a biological phenomenon known as a trophic cascade, where the influence of a top-tier predator ripples down through every level of the food chain, often in ways that are invisible to the naked eye. The eagle is not merely a consumer in this system. It is a regulator that governs the behavior of species far beneath it in the hierarchy. One of the most profound shifts observed by researchers is the creation of a landscape of fear. For decades, waterbirds like the great cormorant and various species of wildfowl could feed and nest with relative impunity. With the reintroduction of the eagle, these species have had to recalibrate their survival strategies. Satellite data and field observations show that cormorant colonies are shifting their nesting sites and altering their foraging patterns to avoid the patrol routes of the flying barn doors. This isn't just about predation. It's about the psychological pressure of a master hunter. By forcing these birds to be more mobile and less concentrated, the eagles prevent the overexploitation of local fish stocks and reduce the buildup of guano, which can pathologically alter the chemistry of small islands and lakeshores. Furthermore, the white-tailed eagle is a notorious kleptoparasite. While they are skilled hunters, they frequently employ a high-risk, high-reward strategy of theft. They have been observed harassing smaller raptors, such as the western marsh harrier, or even otters, forcing them to drop their hard-earned catch. This behavior sounds chaotic, but it serves a critical ecological function by redistributing biomass across the landscape. The eagle acts as a biological processor, moving nutrients from the deep waters of the Shannon estuary or the Atlantic shelf and depositing them in the form of scraps and droppings deep within ancient oak woodlands. This nutrient pump fertilizes the soil with marine-derived nitrogen and phosphorus, elements that are often scarce in inland terrestrial environments. In the River Shannon, Ireland's longest waterway, the eagles have also begun to tackle a modern ecological crisis: invasive species. The Shannon has been heavily colonized by non-native fish like the roach and dace, which can outcompete native trout and salmon. Recent dietary analysis of eagle pellets, the undigested remains of their meals, indicates that these birds are increasingly targeting these slow-moving invasive fish. By focusing their predatory pressure on the most abundant and easily caught prey, the eagles are inadvertently acting as a biological control agent, helping to restore a more balanced competition between native and non-native aquatic life. They are not returning the coast to a static past. They are building a more resilient, dynamic future, where the ghost in the food web has finally regained its physical form. In August 2025, the final chapter of human intervention was written on the shores of Killarney's lakes. As the last 4 Norwegian-born chicks took to the sky, a quiet but profound transformation occurred. The program ceased to be an experiment and became a permanent fixture of the Irish landscape. After 18 years and the release of 245 eagles, the National Parks and Wildlife Service officially stepped back, handing the keys of the coast over to the birds themselves. By early 2026, the data confirmed what conservationists had long hoped. Ireland is no longer a site of reintroduction, but a home to a self-sustaining population of approximately 150 individual eagles, with at least 17 confirmed breeding pairs established from the southern cliffs of Cork to the wild headlands of Donegal. This sovereignty is most visible in the birds' refusal to stay within the boundaries drawn for them. One of the most startling revelations of the tracking data was the autonomous expansion into Northern Ireland. In 2024, a pair that had been released hundreds of kilometers away on the River Shannon traveled north on their own initiative. They established a territory and successfully fledged a chick, the first white-tailed eagle born in Northern Ireland in over 150 years. This cross-border event was a biological declaration of independence. The eagles were selecting habitat based on their own complex ecological criteria, not human projections. From the rugged beauty of the Inishowen Peninsula in Donegal to the quiet reaches of Lough Neagh, the eagles are now bridging political and geographic divides that have existed for centuries. The scientific legacy of this project is unparalleled. The 18-year dataset, generated by the 245 satellite-tagged eagles, represents one of the most comprehensive studies of raptor dispersal in European history. It has provided a granular look at how a species reclaims a lost range, revealing the high site fidelity of adult pairs and the adventurous, multi-county wanderings of the juveniles. These insights are already being used to inform similar reintroduction efforts across the globe, from the Isle of Wight to continental Europe. But beyond the numbers and the GPS coordinates, the true success is cultural. The ancient name Iolar Mara sea eagleus, no longer a linguistic relic. In places like Glengariff, where a live-streamed nest became a global digital sensation, the eagle has become a symbol of rural economic revitalization through ecotourism. As we look toward the future, the nests being built today in the ancient oaks of Killarney or the pines of the Shannon Estuary are becoming permanent monuments. Some of these structures, added to season after season with mud, sticks, and seaweed, will likely be in continuous use for the next century. The white-tailed eagle has reclaimed its place as the processor of the coast, the recycler of the sea, and the undisputed master of the Atlantic winds. The cages are gone, the transmitters will eventually fall away, and the Irish sky is once again occupied by a bird that knows no borders.